Okay. Okay, so now it's recording. Okay, so to start the interview, do you just want to introduce yourself, give a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm Megan Hunt, and I'm a state senator in Nebraska. I represent District 8, which includes the neighborhoods of Dundee and Benson and Keystone and Omaha. My background is really in entrepreneurship and activism. And I was elected in 2018 after working with Omaha Public Schools on their sex education curriculum. So that was sort of where I cut my political teeth, I guess, and decided that, I wanted to stay in the game and maybe run for something. So I've lived in my district for about 20 years. I'm a business owner here. I have a little stationery store, and I live in Benson with my daughter and our dog.
Cool. That's awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about your college experience? Like what did you study? Things like that.
Sure. I went in 2004 to 2008 to Doane College in Blair, Nebraska, which, we no longer have with us anymore. But gosh, that school was around for like 180 years or something. And it started as a Lutheran seminary, but that was my hometown. I grew up in Blair, Nebraska, and I had a lot of mental health challenges when I was in high school, honestly. So I decided to go to college close to home while I kind of continued, recovering and getting better. And so I went to Doane College, and at Doane I studied intercultural communication and German language.
Cool.
And I started out as an education major, but I'm really not a morning person. And I kind of realized, okay, if I end up getting a job where I have to be at school at like 7 a.m. every day, like I'm never going to have a career in this world. So, and I was right about that. I mean, in the legislature, we start at 9 a.m. and that's really hard for me most days. So, so I studied intercultural communication in German, and I thought that I was going to become an English teacher in Germany or in a German-speaking country or community. And I actually did that for a while. I taught English for a minute at Freie Universität in Berlin, and then I also taught some classes in Denmark.
Cool.
And I thought that was going to be my career, but I was also, kind of a crafty person, and I was making wedding dresses on the side, like kind of as a hobby and for fun. And that business ended up kind of getting picked up by like several magazines and several blogs. And the opportunity came for me to run my own business. So I just thought, how many people get to say that they're their own boss?
Right.
I know statistically this probably will never work, but I'm going to give it a try. And 20 years later, I'm still on that same trajectory, basically.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about how you used your degree in Germany and then kind of how your business started. How have you used your degrees or have you with your business?
For a long time, I felt kind of guilty about not studying something that sets you up for like a solid career, like accounting or any of the professional degrees that would then like train you to actually go and do a job. I studied German and communication. You could do anything with that. You could do nothing with that. It's one of those like liberal arts degrees that people make fun of. But in order to be successful with that field of study, I had to be very, very self-directed and very self-motivated, because it's not like you graduate and then there's a career path that falls into your lap. It's not like you graduate and everyone goes, okay, now this is the next thing you do with that degree. I had to be very innovative and very industrious about how I would apply the really field specific skills that I was trained in college to whatever I ended up doing. And so, in communication, I learned a lot about theory. It was a very theory heavy degree, not necessarily like management, like some communication degrees are. And, there was a lot of kind of philosophical angles to that. In German, I think that there's a lot of stuff going on in your mind when you're translating languages and when you're talking across cultures, even if, it's another basically white Western European culture. But there's still cross-cultural differences that I think prepared me to work with lots of other different communities in my life. Yeah, there is kind of some, with the work I did in college, I had to read quite a bit, and I had to synthesize what it is that I learned. And that's also not super different from what I do in the legislature. I mean,
Oh yeah.
the best lawmakers are the ones who read the bills, and the ones who can think, kind of globally about, okay, well, if we pass bill A, how does that affect bill F? And then what does that do to bill J? And, I think the way that I learned in college helped my brain think that way quite a bit. And those are skills that I definitely apply to what I do now.
Sure, that's great because Doane is also a liberal arts school. So it's nice to hear about how liberal arts degrees kind of set you up for this type of things. Okay,
Yeah,
so what we're
you
talking,
can't think about it as like learning a trade or something. You're thinking about, they're teaching you how to think. You're
yeah.
learning how to think in a way that you were never taught in high school. And I mean, I honestly wish that every person could have that experience because it's very mind expanding.
For sure. For sure. Well, while we're talking a little bit about your entrepreneur experience, how has your experience owning a business these last couple of decades? How have they influenced your leadership skills, or how have you used leadership skills to be successful in that endeavor?
Well, it's a little bit like I said, with how you have to be a little bit innovative with the degree when it's not a professional degree. When you run your own business, there's no manual that you can go buy from the store that tells you what you should do. I mean, people write business books, but like, there's nobody in the world who can tell you what you should do with your time and your talent and your resources as a business owner that you wouldn't better understand finding out for yourself. And I'm just thinking about this a little bit. What was the question? Like, what was the kernel of the question?
Like, have you used any leadership skills, and what are they whilst running your business?
Well, one thing in my business is I've always like hired like kind of small groups of people, and I have never had like a whole bunch of employees. When I ran my dress design company, we had a staff of 12, and we did sewing and we did design, and we handled the brides that we were working with, who were sometimes like very overwhelming people to work with. And I think it's very important in leadership that you trust people to do the job that you hired them to do, that you don't micromanage what it is that they're doing, that you let them do their work and you let them shine. And if they want to like change the work a little bit, just trust their judgment and understand that they're probably doing that for the right reasons. One of the more recent companies that I ran was called Hello Holiday, and it was a web-based boutique. And then we also had a brick and mortar shop in my district here. And we helped independent fashion designers produce and distribute their collections. So this is kind of a business that grew out of the dress design company that I was doing. I realized that there were kind of a lot of gatekeepers in the fashion industry, and that if you were out on your own, it was really hard to break into mainstream fashion conversation. So we started Hello Holiday to kind of help those designers who were like me, and expose them to a more mainstream audience. But when we opened the space, the brick and mortar shop, then we had a physical space. And so it's always been really important to me that we never really let the space sit empty, that we partner with local organizations and community groups and nonprofits, and sort of live our values by sharing our resources with other organizations with the same values. When you're the boss, I mean, you get to decide how political you want to be, how controversial you want to be, how much you want to tread into those waters. And that's something that I've always been completely comfortable with. We did events, against gun violence and for gun safety legislation. We did events for reproductive justice, we raised a lot of money for RACES, this organization that helps separated families at the border. And we were always very, very vocal about our values as a company. And sometimes we lost business because of that. We had bad reviews on Yelp or bad reviews on Facebook saying, you know, I'm never going to go to this store because they said Black Lives Matter or something stupid. And I mean, that's fine with me. And I wish that there were more businesses that had the courage to say, you know, if there's some customers who decide that we're not for them, that's okay, because we don't want to waste the opportunity to share this platform as a business owner with organizations that are actually doing better things than just like making a profit and engaging in consumerist capitalism. And, you know, when you're selling dresses or stationery or whatever, you know, I'm getting a thing from the supplier and then I mark it up ×2 and I sell it to the customer. Like there's nothing like helping the world by doing that. It's literally bad for the world. And so, sorry, my dog.
You're good.
But, you know, if we can share this platform as a business with organizations that are actually close to the people who are on the ground, helping with the issues that matter to us, then it makes me feel like in this consumerist world, I'm at least doing something good.
Yeah, for sure. Well, going off a little bit about your activism and kind of in the politics realm. So can you tell us your story of like, how'd you get into politics and state legislature?
Sure. Let me grab her real quick.
Okay, you're fine.
She's coming with me. This is Cricket.
Hello.
Cricket, sorry.
No, he's all good. He's adorable.
Thank you. So the way I finally got involved in politics was in 2015. Omaha Public Schools was starting to consider their sex education curriculum and human growth and development. At that time, the curriculum hadn't been updated since 1971. Jeez. So in a lot of cases, you had kids who are getting the same sex education that their grandparents had gotten. And, you know, sex is the same as it's always been, but, you know, since 1971, we've had the AIDS epidemic. We've had an increasingly out and increasingly depressed and suicidal LGBTQ population. We've had the internet and pornography and bullying and all of the things that come along with the internet. And we've also had kind of changing social norms around issues like consent, around healthy relationships, and all of these things needed to be updated in the curriculum to kind of make sure that kids today were getting the best education that they could possibly have, and that it was medically accurate and age appropriate and research-based. And, you know, the curriculum wasn't that. So long story short, it was very hard. It was not unlike a lot of the conversations that are happening now in the State Board of Education around sex education, but we prevailed. Unlike the statewide standards, in Omaha, we got it done. And we got it done by organizing parents, by hosting events to get the word out, by myth busting, you know, making sure that folks understood what this was and what this wasn't, reaching out to teachers, having teachers do outreach. And I was part of a group that played a really pivotal role in that. And so after we had that win, it was very intoxicating to me. It really got my adrenaline going to get that win, because, you know, in a conservative state, anytime you get any incremental progressive win, it just feels like, how did we even do that? Like, I can't believe this worked. And that was very intoxicating to me. And I wanted to feel that all the time. And I started to realize that people were seeing me not just as a leader in business, but potentially as a political leader. So you know, that was 2015. So I spent a couple years meeting with folks in the community leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, candidates past and present, electeds past and present, just anybody who I felt could expand my network as a leader. And I talked to them about my experience and my goals. And I said, do you think I should go for it? And there was not one person who said, I don't think that you should run for office. So that's how I ended up getting into it.
Yeah.
It wasn't, in some ways it was like kind of a traditional path, and that it was like, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. In some ways, it was a really traditional path because it was, a normal person having a problem and running for office to fix the problem. And in some ways, it wasn't normal because typically I feel like candidates are recruited is something that I've learned. And so when someone kind of pops up out of the community, like, I'm mad and I'm running for office, it disrupts the establishment a little bit because they're like, okay, well, we were thinking of these people to maybe run, and now you're here. So that was like, there were just very interesting dynamics at play in the campaign. And I've learned that in politics, that's always the case. It's every election, there's some element of that.
Interesting. Yeah, well, that's awesome to hear about your journey and how you got there. So we looked a little bit at like your website, and it looked great, and the things that you stand for and are working for, it all looked really awesome. And you talked a lot about inclusivity on your website. And if you wanted to expand, we think that that's like really important to leadership. So why do you think that is essential to being a good, not just a leader, but a good legislator, like your job?
Well, even though, I represent about 39,000 people in Midtown Omaha, the decisions I make affect all about 2 million people in the state. So when there's somebody in Red Cloud who is happy with one of my decisions, that affected them directly. When there's someone in, Scottsbluff who's not happy with one of my votes, that's because I affected them directly. And I think that part of leadership is understanding that the decisions you make don't just affect your constituency, but that ripples out throughout other constituencies and people who have other interests. And you come to learn that something about leadership is about disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb. You're going to make a lot of tough decisions, and even if the decision isn't tough for you, the decision will continue to ripple out and come back to you in blowback or in consequences or in other things that happen down the road. And you just have to think big about how are all of these pieces going to be affecting each other down the road, thinking in a long-term way. I think in Nebraska, with term limits in the legislature, we can only serve 2 terms of 4 years, so 8 years total. It's really diminished a lot of that long-term thinking because folks are thinking, okay, I have to do something the next 4 years to be amazing and get reelected. And then after they get reelected, they think, okay, well, now I'm done. So,
right.
Nothing I do matters necessarily. And I don't think it's that flip. I mean, I don't think people really think that little of it, but there is a little element of that at play. In terms of the inclusivity, it's really hard to gain the trust of a constituency if they don't relate to you at all. Mm-hmm. And in Nebraska, I think part of this is because we pay our legislators so little. State lawmakers only make $12,000 a year in Nebraska. So it really makes it so different types of folks just can't afford to run, because you basically either have to be okay with being poor and having no benefits, or have a wealthy spouse, or be independently wealthy yourself. Right. That's the only way that you can afford to run. And because of that, the split in the legislature tends to be millennials and really young people who are fine being poor, who say, yeah, this is no different from the lifestyle I was already used to, waiting tables and whatever, being in school. And then you get really wealthy older people who are farmers or bankers or attorneys and stuff like that. And a lot of them are retired, and all of them are white, and all of them are married, and all of them are heterosexual Christian men. So good for them. That's fine. Love them. Love working with them. But what that has led to is that the Nebraska legislature skews a lot more conservative than Nebraska actually is. I mean, when you look at statewide polling around issues like abortion and immigration, and even things like critical race theory, which is now the new boogeyman, or healthcare, or any of these issues, Nebraskans are actually much more progressive / centrist than the legislature is. And so when you have a body of leaders, whether that's in a company or in a school or in a literal system of government, that doesn't reflect the identities and experiences of the people they serve, it's really hard to get the trust of those people. And what do? They either fight back, and there's, explosions between change happening outside of the institution and lack of change happening inside the institution, or people get apathetic and they disengage and they say, government doesn't work for me. Everybody is on the take, everybody is immoral. Politicians suck. It doesn't matter if I vote. Like, then you get the apathy. So it really worries me that we are in a little bit of a stage of apathy in Nebraska with local politics. And a big reason for that is that inclusivity and that representation. Like, our elected bodies don't look like the people they serve. And that's a problem for the institution and for the state.
For sure. Well, that's nice to hear your thoughts on that. So another thing about legislator that we wanted to ask about is, clearly politics are pretty polarized at the moment. When you're like voting or working as a senator, do you work through a partisan lens, or are you more like independent and open-minded towards each thing, or kind of how do you approach it?
Well, in Nebraska, we're really unique because we have the only nonpartisan unicameral in the country. And we also have the smallest legislature in the country with only 49 members. So we don't have an upper and lower house like every other state does. And we don't have any official party leadership. So we don't have a majority minority leader. We don't have any caucuses. There's basically no party control within the legislature at all. And that gives all of us a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom to vote the way we want, because there's not going to be any punishment or consequences if we don't, hang with the majority leader, if we don't, go with the rest of our caucus. And I think that is a really good thing for good governance. It's a little bit more like, I think government is meant to operate, because instead of voting along party lines on every single issue, we tend to caucus around issues. So you'll have, Republicans who work on climate change legislation. You'll have Democrats who are opposed to gun safety legislation. You'll have Democrats who are against reproductive justice and Republicans who are supportive of abortion rights. And so you really get this mix of, it's not just like you're with your one team and you're all on the same side all the time, like you see in other states.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say that I operate very independently, but I would also say that that's the norm in Nebraska. There are people on both sides who are just like, you cannot move them, but it's not the majority of people.
Oh, that's super interesting. That is not what I imagined it would be. That's awesome.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing for the people, for constituents.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
If you're in Western Nebraska and you've got a conservative senator and you really care about climate change, or you really care about immigration, it's not pointless to talk to your senator about it, because you might be able to move them. They might agree with you. And, in other states, I don't think that would be normal.
Mm-hmm. So obviously this is like an interview that's going to be shared to our college student body. And so we were interested in hearing your thoughts kind of on how young people can be involved in politics, or just like young people's importance in politics, and kind of what your thought as a senator is on those things.
Young people are extremely important because, you guys represent the way that everything's going. I still think of myself as like, I'm 18 and I'm 30, I'm almost 36. And so I'm like, when will I stop thinking that I'm Gen Z? Because I'm literally not. I'm like almost middle age now. But young people, to get involved politically, you don't necessarily have to be involved in literal politics. Like, you don't have to help a campaign. You don't have to run for office. You don't have to hold any role in the parties or anything like that. I think the best way for young people to get involved civically and stay connected to their communities civically is through nonprofit and community work. it doesn't have to be a literal nonprofit. It can just be like a community organization or a collective or something. But I'm a huge supporter of activism and advocacy, because these are the groups of people who are closest to the folks affected by an issue. They're able to move faster. They don't have institutional bureaucracy to deal with. And these are also really great ways to build your network and build your power, honestly, to collect power around you in terms of who you know, what your reputation is and growing that, and also just kind of continuing to hone what it is that you want for your future. I mean, I wouldn't have gotten involved in the sex education stuff, which is what led me to run for office and be here. And this is like my favorite thing I've ever done, if I hadn't gotten involved volunteering with Planned Parenthood. I mean, and I almost didn't do that. So if there's something that you're thinking about pursuing, look at the organizations in your community that are already working on those things. Don't invent the wheel.
Right.
Be a joiner. Join the people who are already working on that stuff. See how you can lend your skills to them and help them continue the mission that you share with them, whatever that is. Maybe it's a church group, maybe it's a neighborhood association, whatever. We have a really great, this makes me think, we have a really great organization called Mode Shift Omaha here in Omaha, and they advocate for alternative transportation. So bike lanes, cutting curbs to make sure that people who use wheelchairs and people with strollers, et cetera, can get from curb to curb. Mm-hmm. Buses, just any kind of alternative transportation. And I think that organization grew out of a neighborhood association. Like, it was just like-minded folks who then started this organization, and they've actually made a big impact in Omaha with the mayor and city council. So, the network that I've built is probably the most valuable thing that I have. I'm not like a super rich person. I don't own any property. Like, there's nothing that I physically have that I can trade for any value, but my network is worth millions to me because I know who to call. I know who can help me with an issue. I know who to pick up the phone and who's going to help me with this. And so that's what I think young people should work on building, because that's going to help you figure out where it is you need to end up and, who you really are.
Yeah. So just a quick follow-up question. So I feel like sometimes students or younger people they are faced with like the stigma that we're just like dumb kids. Are like legislators and senators like listening to young people when they like rally for ideas, they advocate for things? Are they being heard, would you say, in Nebraska, or if you have knowledge of other places?
I think they do listen to young people. I think sometimes it depends on the way the message is delivered. You have to meet people where they are, whether that's a lawmaker or a professor or whatever person you're trying to reach. And depending on the lawmaker you're trying to reach, like you have to figure out where you're going to find them. Is it email? Is it phone? Is it at the rally? Is it in their office directly? A lot of my colleagues are very traditional and they want to go through traditional means of outreach. And so coming to their office or giving them a phone call or an email, that's the best way to reach them. But I don't really think that they devalue or denigrate the input of young people.
Okay.
I think that my colleagues would be really enthused to get more feedback from young people. And especially if there's a bent of like, either I'm from Nebraska, talk about your connection to the community. Like, I'm from Nebraska, or I moved to Nebraska for college, and, here's what I love about the community. Here's what I want to change. That's why I'm contacting you. In order for me to feel like I have a future here, this is important for me that you understand. And, that's the only way that we're going to change anything. And one thing about, people stereotyping young folks or thinking less of them, let me tell you a secret. That's going to happen to you forever. It's going to be because you're young, or it's going to be because you're a woman, or it's going to be because you're not straight, or you're not Christian, or you're dressed weird, or your hair looks weird, or you have a zit, like whatever. Your whole life, people are going to downgrade and put marks against you that you don't deserve. And you just have to do it anyway. You just have to say, what other people think about me is none of my business. I know my concepts. I know what I'm about. And, if people don't get that, that's really like not my fault and it's not my problem. You just have to do it anyway. Do the hard thing anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's really, I bet for college students who watch this, it'll be really good and empowering to hear. And so
there's people who don't listen to me either. And it's like, trust me, this goes away.
Yeah. And as a leader, since this is for a leadership group here on campus, could you share a little bit about the leadership traits that you have found valuable while working as a senator? Like what you've really used in order to be successful?
I think, and this, I feel for me came only through experience. This is not something I was born knowing how to do, but knowing which battles to pick and knowing when it's worth it and when it's not. And, there's a lot of I'm going to talk from my own lens as a progressive. I understand not everybody is, but if you're a conservative, for example, you can probably take what I'm saying and see it through your own lens as well. Right. As a progressive, there's a lot of very left-wing social issues that I feel very passionately about that I think we need to implement in Nebraska. But I can't always be beating that drum or I lose credibility. Or my colleagues and other people in the legislature say, she's not actually interested in getting along. She's not actually interested in being effective. So there's a difference between there's not a difference, but a balance between effectiveness and kind of staying true to yourself and your passions and things like that. So knowing which battles to pick and sure, what to kind of take a break on. And for me, reproductive justice is the thing that I have kind of hung my hat on. And I've said, this is an issue that I'm never going to compromise on in Nebraska, that I'm going to continue to be a leader on. And in order to create the space in the institution for that issue to have such a footprint, I've had to make some choices and put some other things aside. It's very exhausting to care about everything at once. And we have to care about everything at once. But at the end of the day, there's only so many minutes in the debate. There's only so many days in the session. And we have to make some hard choices about what we're going to do and not do. So, just that moderation in the fight. I'm a big fighter, and it's been a very useful leadership experience to me to learn when you fight and when you listen, I guess. And that too is part of the fight. Like, it's not, not every tool is doing this. Sometimes you step back, you let people come to you, you get information, you work on yourself and your own arguments, your own strategies. But, 10 years ago, I was just fight all the time. And I think that I'm much more effective now that I've learned how to pick my battles a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's most of our hard-hitting questions. And just as kind of a wrap up, what are you working on now? Kind of what's next that you want to achieve in the next couple of years?
I feel like there's a column of things that I'm always working on. So some of those issues are food assistance, just expanding access to food assistance. For example, in Nebraska, if you ever have a drug conviction for possession or use or distribution, you are barred from getting food assistance for the rest of your life. So if you're 18 or 19 and you get caught with a joint and you're 45 and and then you turn 45 and you're a single mom and you lose your job during a pandemic, sorry, you can't get food assistance because you had that drug conviction. So I'm really focused on trying to overturn that. Raising the minimum wage, things around access to contraceptives and abortion, I continue to work on. So that's in this category of stuff I'm always working on. And then there's this other category of things that come up where you're just like, oh shit, now I have to work on this too. And for example, one thing in this category that I'm working on now is maybe some of you heard this too. There was this NPR special investigation. Dog is being noisy. I'm going to take you with me. There's this NPR special investigation that was like showing that in so many states, there's foster youth who are eligible for Social Security benefits because they've lost a parent or they have a disability or something like that. And the state has been taking their Social Security benefits and not telling them and not telling anybody. So I did some digging and I found out that this is happening in Nebraska. And the state has hired this firm called Maximus, and they're based in like South Carolina or something. And what Maximus does is they comb through the records of all the foster youth and they find out who's eligible for benefits. They apply for those benefits on behalf of the kid, keep them for the state, and never tell anybody. And to me, that's just like, it's basically financial abuse. It's like theft from these kids. And so
children.
Shit, now we have to stop that. I got enough to do, but we're working on that. Another thing is I am on the State Tribal Relations Committee, which deals with like Indian affairs in Nebraska. And so I've been working with the tribes in Nebraska on kind of some specific issues that affect them. And I'll be introducing legislation on stuff like that too. So that's another thing that I learned being elected versus campaigning, you know, what the difference is once you actually get within the system. It's like, okay, there's all this stuff that you campaigned on that you want to do. And then there come all these fires that need to be put out and you have to pivot and change and be like, oh God, now I have to become an expert in foster care reimbursement.
Right.
I don't know anything about that, but I do now.
Oh, that's great to hear what you're gonna kind of be working on. So that's all we really have. So unless you have anything else you would like to add.
I mean, I would just tell students, don't wait to be invited to a table. Don't wait for the world to ask you why you matter. You have to just show all the time. You have to be your own advocate. Just understand that nobody knows what they're doing and you don't look stupid and